All right, everybody, welcome to BO Boys for Thursday, November 9th. F it, it's a raw feed. We are doing it live. I'm Clayton.
Yeah, I'm Pat. And Clayton, I got a big smile on my face because we got a big movie opening this weekend. It's a superhero movie, so you know what that means. Here joining us, third mic for this episode. Everyone knew it. There was no other guest we could have had on this episode other than the one and only David Thompson of the Direct podcast. And once again, he is hosting his other podcast, Cinema Spending is back. It's back. If you remember when David first joined us, he joined us as the host of Cinema Spending and he's brought it back. David, welcome back to the BO Boys.
Oh, no, we can't hear you,
David, you are on mute.
Sorry. It's a pleasure to be back. I am so happy to be here. It's going to be wonderful when I get to hop on with you guys and there is a superhero film ready to actually be a smash hit in theaters. The last couple of times, it really hasn't gone that way. So I'm hoping one day, Spider-Man or Superman or Batman will open in theaters and it'll actually be gearing up to be a big hit because this time it's not looking great.
It's not. Well, okay. Well, listen, you and Clayton and I, we're lovers of box office. We're never haters. We don't want to be looked at as haters. We don't drink the haterade. You know, we mainly stick to water at our age. We not, nothing off a supermarket shelf. We can't. Our stomachs can't take it. So we definitely don't drink the haterade. But we, you're here as the comic book guy, as the chief comic book correspondent. So the Marvels is coming out this weekend, and we're going to get into all the things that are possibly wrong with it, that the negative outlook on the box office. But let's open up with make your case. Have you seen this film yet? You're also a reviewer. Have you had a chance to see the film?
Yeah, I saw it last night.
Okay, so I mean, is there a case that you could make that is pro Marvels, pro why people should actually be excited for this movie, why they should maybe be optimistic about the box office? Let's start with the positive here because there's a lot of negative on this movie. Give us the sort of rosy tinted glasses, the starry-eyed view of this opening weekend of the Marvels.
Yeah, the Marvels is a definite improvement on Captain Marvel, in my opinion. I think the Marvels is significantly better, bringing in Iman Vellani, bringing in Teyonah Parris, and focusing on this little team that they create within the story actually enhances, I would say, all of those characters, including Brie Larson's Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel. So I think making it a team film improved the plot. It's relatively short. It's actually the shortest MCU movie of all time. An hour 45. It feels it. The pace is quick. And with that being said, not to dive too deep, but the movie focuses and plays to its strengths while I would say ignoring some elements of like the plot just to kind of keep going. But as a viewer, as an audience member, the comedy's there. The action at times is wonderful. There's some spotty CGI parts, but sometimes the action's actually very cool. So I think this will be an audience hit. Now, critics wise, I think people are being pretty harsh on it. I saw the Rotten Tomato score is pretty low. It's going to end up being lower than Captain Marvel, which is insane to me. Captain Marvel is a significantly more boring movie than the Marvels. Like I was in a pretty filled theater. Like it was oppressive, but there's a good amount of people in there. We're laughing, we're chuckling, we're having a good time. It wasn't one of those things where most people walking out of the theater I went to, and I'll end with this, and I had the same exact thought, that was better than I was expecting. That's what everyone was saying walking out. Now, expectations are low and should probably stay there because it's not necessarily going to be one of the best movies of the year, one of the best superhero movies of this generation, but it is better than most people were expecting.
All right, there you go. So we're starting off with the positive. It's short and it's better than people are expecting. And it's short. Also, it sounds like it's short. So that's great. So now Clayton, again, we don't drink the haterade. We're not haters. did anything that David, who saw this film, he saw it with a crowd already, anything that he say change your outlook on what you expect this weekend from this movie?
Well, I mean, we've seen the Marvel fatigue in action at the box office. I mean, we've seen Guardians 3 open lower than expected and then rebound because people realized, oh, wait, this is actually a good movie. I actually like these characters. I forgot how much I like this sort of thing when it's done correctly. I don't expect that to be the same case, obviously, with Marvels because those characters are not as popular as the Guardians, and they never will be. But is it possible, in your estimation, David, that this movie could be sort of more of an Elemental situation, which I will still say Elemental was not a hit, but
Hmm.
open really low, like scary low. But
Yeah.
then the drops aren't too bad. People actually start going to see it, and it doesn't become an absolute disaster.
I do see that as a possibility.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll see. In November, it gets pretty, all of a sudden we have Hunger Games coming out. I think
Yep.
Marvel should have pushed this up to November 3rd once Dune 2 left that slot.
Yep.
That's me, though. I mean, what do I know? But I think that would have made a lot of sense. They already missed because of the actors' strike. It just ended. Hooray. But for this movie, it came and went, right? There was no promotion. And I think that would have been a significant positive for this film, getting these actresses all in front of cameras, seeing their chemistry off camera, out of character. That would have, I think, really helped interest and just to see their personalities shine. We got really none of that. The marketing was shitty, to be quite frank. Like, it really had pretty poor marketing. And even having now seen the film, it didn't do some elements of it justice. They went too generic with it. And it's fascinating you brought up Guardians of the Galaxy because people were getting burnt by Marvel. Doctor Strange 2, Quantumania, right? Ant-Man 3. These movies were opening pretty hot. Doctor Strange was a massive, massive opening, but they weren't liking the films. So Guardians, you see Marvel, people are thinking, I'm not sure this time. And then you realize it's a James Gunn project. It's Guardians of the Galaxy. It gets rave reviews. To Elemental, I just don't see how it's going to have those kinds of legs because it is a different time of year. But I could see, I mean, it's not going to have the biggest opening in the world. I could see the drop in week 2, week 3 not being super harsh because I do think the anecdotal word of mouth between fans and just general audience members will be overall positive.
Okay. I mean, it's so interesting how the expectations for this movie have gotten so low that we're almost feeling optimistic because the reviews have come out and it hasn't been a disaster. Because I think up until a few days ago, that was also in the air. The fact that Marvel embargoed everything so late. And, usually Marvel will get reviews out there a few weeks ahead of time, definitely earlier than this. I think there was the thought that this movie was going to be screened and the word of mouth would be it's an outright disaster. Now, the Rotten Tomatoes score is at 59%. That means less and less these days, I think, with the amount of critics that are out there and, whatever. It's interesting to see, though, that this isn't that bad.
Pat, that's
But
bad.
it's
50s
pretty
is
bad.
bad. Are you kidding me? 59 is terrible.
Well, I do
When
think
Marvel
it shows,
movies used to be in the 70s and the 80s, that's
well,
terrible,
I
Pat.
want to throw this to you, David. Is that a shift? Because like you said, the Marvels, oh, I'm sorry, Captain Marvel 2019 came out and got what, like 79% Rotten Tomato. And
Yeah.
you said it yourself, this is a much better movie than that. And in retrospect, that was a kind of bad movie that I think rode a wave of just all out Marvel good feelings that even came from critics at the time. So
Yeah.
it's just another sign, I think, of the tide turning in so many corners. Audiences, critics, everyone has just kind of gotten sick of this genre. So a movie that was worse in 2019 may have gotten just the benefit of the doubt because everyone got wrapped up in loving the superhero stuff, 4 years ago.
Yeah, the way I've been looking at it is Captain Marvel, which ended up grossing $1 billion globally, which is an unbelievable number. It
Yep.
was released at the perfect
Yeah.
situational time and place. Right
Yep.
before Endgame, it was the first MCU solo female lead. Brie Larson's here. She's going to play a role. She's going to be one of the most powerful characters in the entire universe. And everyone wanted to see the next Marvel chapter, no matter what
Mhm.
it was. I think, like you said, the critic score being higher was a lot of benefit of the doubt. Now we're seeing the total opposite, right?
Yep.
I think we're seeing reviews that are being overtly harsh to put down the genre because they're over the genre, right?
Right.
Like I think Quantum Mania, looking back, did a lot of harm because that was a film that was put on a pedestal. It was the end of a trilogy while also setting up the future Avengers film. And it just simply did not work. And it was a bit of a train wreck. And to be fair, people just don't really care for, I would say, Brie Larson as Captain Marvel as well. Like that's its own thing. There's a whole group of people that just aren't really fans of her and the character. And she's still the leading role, but that may have been part of the reason why they brought it on as a team aspect. They changed the title and all these things. So it is really interesting because now, November 2023, the outlook is just totally different. And
Mhm.
people are thinking totally different. And Marvel Studios is now having to build back up and reset and retool and figure out a way forward. And unfortunately, it looks like the Marvels is going to just be one of the losers in all of this, where maybe they will have, bigger and better projects down the line that'll be super successful and people will love it. But this one's not going to be it. But I do think there is going to be a small element of hardcore fans, even just MCU fans that really want to see the whole franchise succeed, that are going to be singing its praises probably even harder than they should be, just
Mhm.
because it's not that bad. It's
Right.
not
Right.
it's not the end of the world. It's not this
That
catastrophic failure.
that's a hard tagline though for a studio to put on in a commercial. The
Yeah,
Marvels, it's
exactly.
not that bad. So, is this a factor? I think we've seen with the last year or so of DC films with, Black Adam and especially Shazam and The Flash and possibly with Aquaman 2 coming up, that fans there sort of look at those DC movies as just dead ducks, until the reboot happens. They're sort of looking at it as those movies don't count. Those movies aren't worth watching because there's going to be a reboot. Is there almost that feeling? And again, you're dialed in. You're the host of the Direct podcast. You're the chief comic book correspondent here. Is there that feeling in any way, even with the Marvel fans, where they're almost waiting on the X-Men or the Fantastic Four? And as Clayton and I have talked about, those are not slam doinks. Those are not sure things as the cure. But there's almost that feeling now of the stuff that's still on the slate is like almost what we have to get through to get to the reboot. I mean, is that a harebrained theory, or is there any kind of feeling with Marvel fans that like the stuff that's already made is almost not the stuff that we're waiting for anymore?
There's an element to that, I would say. I think what's happened with Marvel is that they built too much. They released
Mhm.
too many series and too many movies post pandemic at this point, where I think many of their audience members during their first three phases from 2008 to 2019, over those 11 years, they only had to go see movies. If
Yeah.
you missed a couple, it was fine. There's too much homework now, and I think
Mm,
that's the problem. And they're going to dial it back. They're already announcing for their new Echo series that they're calling it Marvel Spotlight. And they're trying to kind of rebrand a little bit and be like, hey, you don't have to watch anything else to understand this and enjoy this project. So I think what was their strength at Marvel Studios, the connectivity and the
yep.
building blocks of it all, that's all been now crumbling down because they put too many blocks. They didn't build,
Mm,
that foundation for phase 4 and phase 5 since 2020, and now it's getting topsy-turvy, and and the Marvels is kind of it crashing down because even a Multiverse of Madness coming off the heels of No Way Home, not the best movie in the world, not one of those groundbreaking MCU films. It performed wonderfully and everyone
Right.
wanted to go see it. And there was still that hype level. What's so strange about the Marvels is that up until this point, pretty much every MCU movie for the last 15 years has had that opening weekend intrigue, that opening weekend. I've got to see this right now. We've seen it lately where movies have opened pretty hot and then taken steep drops, but they've still always opened hot. And that's what's going to be strange about the Marvels. DC has maybe a little bit to do with it just because they're oversaturating the market with shitty DC movies that don't matter. And that doesn't help anyone, right?
Right.
Like,
Right.
I do think, and we can move on. I do think there could be something even better on the horizon when DC gets its shit together with James Gunn. And we're talking years from now, right? Like we'll see. Things move and things shake and we'll see, but I think they're going to make less. They're going to be smarter. They're going to spend less money and not just because before they could just throw whatever money at any project and it was a success for them. And now they're learning that they cannot do that.
I don't think the must-see aspect is here with the Marvels and the Marvel movies right now because, like you were saying, the first phases were moving towards something. So each little sprinkle of a stinger, would build to something, to an ultimate end game. Truly a movie called Endgame. And now there's no reason to rush out to see the Marvels because whatever teaser or whatever stinger at the end, who knows? They've screwed their audience by, oh, here's this guy, here's Harry Styles as Star Fox. You'll never see him again in anything. Here's Charlize Theron as Clea. You're not going to see her again, right? Or if you do, who knows? It could be 2026, 2027. These things aren't building to anything concrete like a Thanos standoff. So that's why there's no need to rush out anymore and see these things because they aren't leading to anything.
So here's something I noticed, and I think we've all seen that last minute trailer that Disney put out for the Marvels, dropped I think yesterday, and it just reeks of the most desperation I think any of us have ever seen since Marvel Studios started with Iron Man. There's never been the level of desperation we saw in this final Marvels trailer. Opens up with 30 seconds of just footage of Iron Man, Black Widow, Thor, just reminding people of the Avengers that they like. And then it teases at the end of the trailer, and obviously we don't know, no spoilies here, David, but it teases at the end of the trailer a very desperate, they look into the sky and they say, oh my God, they're here, or something like to that effect. They really try in this trailer to make it seem like, Superman is about to fly down, or who knows, the X-Men, Fantastic Four, they're going to be in this. So, could you talk to do you think that's going to work in any way? Do you think either the angle of, hey, remember the ones that you liked? Well, she knew them. Captain Marvel hung out with Iron Man. Or the angle of, hey, don't worry, we just dropped a giant, huge development at the end of this movie, and maybe Wolverine is going to show up. Like, do you think either of those tactics are going to work?
Yeah, I think that last trailer, like, it got me excited, but it was more so because I'm just a lifelong fan and I loved seeing them back and the Avengers. I mean, they literally play the Avengers theme at the end. You don't hear the Avengers theme in the movie. Just quick spoiler alert.
Okay, got it.
That's not a thing. It's not an Avengers movie. There are things set up, of course. There is a post-credit scene. There are these, moments where we're trying to build. And to Clayton's point, the stingers and all these things that are being set up, it's just too spread out, right? Where it's like, where it's not narrow at all. It's not one after the other. It used to be so much simpler. And I think they never anticipated how things just got so overly complicated so
Right.
quickly. And now it's the disaster of the Jonathan Major situation, by the way,
Yeah.
where it's like he's supposed to be the next big bad and dude might get recast, you know? I
Yes.
mean, his career could be he could just be canceled, you know, for lack
Right.
of a better term.
Right.
So no, I really do think that people will be excited. Fans are going to like the movie. Like I liked the movie and I
Mhm.
enjoyed the post-credit scene and I enjoyed what they set up in it. It got me excited. And I think it actually does a pretty good job of doing it, where I would say that the Marvels ends in a way and teases things in the future that seem more concrete, I think, than maybe some of the other stingers that we've gotten, where I can kind of see the building blocks, or I can see the pieces developing together, because eventually there will be that culminating moment. They will get to an Avengers film. It's just how they rapidly pull all the pieces together right before the movie comes out, because that's what I'm missing right now. There really currently isn't a team. There isn't a clear plan. And to be fair, I mean, Loki on Disney Plus, it's the best thing going for Marvel right now. It's
Mhm.
season 2 has been great. The finale is this Thursday, and Thursday and Friday, if you're a big fan, is a super exciting day to be an MCU fan.
And on that show, I have not watched any of the Marvel shows. My wife had WandaVision on when that aired, and I saw some of it, glimpses of it in the background when I would walk into the room. That's the most I've seen of an MCU TV show. The Loki show, though, is Jonathan Majors heavily featured in that? Is his Kang character still because that would have been filmed a while ago. So is that still something that's being pushed through that show?
Yeah, it is. And it's a big
Interesting.
concern.
Interesting.
And it's
It's got to be concerning. Um so with you mentioned the Avengers and how, that'll happen again. I mean, the word on the street is, as part of this desperation before the Marvels coming out, the word on the street is Marvel's trying to get Downey back. They're trying to get Scarlett Johansson back, Iron Man, Black Widow. They're trying to, I guess, just get the characters that everyone loved to come back and do another Avengers movie. So in your reporting, because you are, of course, you work at the Direct and you're reporting on all this stuff. Is that an actual possibility? And do you feel like even just the word of that getting out, is that good or bad for people's enthusiasm about Marvel right now? Because again, that feels like on one hand, people could get excited that that's a possibility, but on the other hand, it just makes everything coming out now feel that much smaller.
No, it's cheap. You can't do
Mhm.
that because you have to build with what you have currently. Because
Mhm.
if you just bring everyone back that literally died within the
Yes.
MCU, it's just cheap. And I get the idea of it, right? RDJ is wonderful. He is Iron Man. You would draw people in. There is a big nostalgia thing happening with the MCU right now. No Way Home, Deadpool with Wolverine coming back.
Right.
But that's not the direction. That's not it. That's not the way to do it.
What if
It's
you
it,
brought Downey back as not as Iron Man, but he's going to get the Oscar nom, possibly the win for Oppenheimer. Could you bring him in as Louis Strauss from Oppenheimer instead of as Tony Stark and do it that way? Like, would fans accept as long as it's Downey? Maybe bring him in as I'm sure Chaplin. The IP there is probably in the public domain. So could you bring Downey in as Chaplin in an Avengers film?
At this point, anything's possible.
Yeah.
Anything's possible in the multiverse. You can do whatever you want.
That's
I,
the
I,
thing. It's a multiverse. You could bring him in as this character from Heart and Souls,
I-
because a portal opened up.
and that's the problem with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's the same. It's so funny that the Marvel film division learned no lessons from the comic books and how crossovers destroyed comics and how it got so complicated. You couldn't just pick up Spider-Man and be like, "Oh, I know what's going on." And then the fact that they are nobody ever dies. right? And that's another problem with the comics. It's the same problem with the movies, is that when you create the multiverse, when you create these ability for people to come back from the dead, it destroys any sort of dramatic tension that these movies have. Now, when Iron Man dies in Endgame, that is an amazing moment and a perfect capper to his story and that story. If you bring him back, it doesn't matter how you do it. It doesn't matter if it's a different timeline, whatever. Here's an old Iron Man from a timeline where this didn't happen. It still negates that drama, because then it means that nothing meant anything.
Yep. And that's the thing. You nailed it. With comic books, that has been the problem, where you kill a character and they always come back. You know in the comics, you can always write something in, they'll come back eventually. There'll always be some way for them to come back. That can't be the movies. You can't do that with the films. You have to reboot, reset, do something different. You can't keep killing characters and bring them back. I mean, DC made that mistake super early on with Batman versus Superman, then to Justice League. I mean, they did that so quick, and everyone knew that was a massive mistake, and we all know how that ended.
Right.
Yep.
The multiverse storytelling that Marvel has been doing. Now, obviously, that worked in a big way with Spider-Man No Way Home. You had 3 Spider-Man, box office was gigantic, first mega hit post-COVID. But and like you said, Doctor Strange did do really well. Maybe slightly less than the hoped for, but that was a giant movie. But do you think that the reliance on the multiverse has been a problem for Marvel beyond those movies? Because I mean, my take is that for a regular Joe Lunch Pail, Susie Crochet, or just your average audience out there, this stuff has gotten way too confusing. And the Marvel's trailer, a big part, the only plot that really is given in this movie is there's a tear in the fabric of the universe, and things are switching around, and that seems to have been the plot of the last 4 years worth of Marvel movies. So do you think that as the sort of the main plot line has been a problem for these movies?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, it goes back to what we were just saying. I feel like No Way Home used the multiverse in a very smart way. They used it to bring back iconic characters that everyone wanted to see, that everyone was literally dying to see in the fall of 2021 and could not wait to go check out that movie, $260 million worth. So, and that movie was good. Like, they used it in a smart way. They used it to build the character. They still kept Tom Holland's Peter Parker and Spider-Man as the main guy, and just made it boosted and built up his character and developed him in a big way, where he's left off in a really, really cool story. Multiverse of Madness was I would say, the first time we saw where, okay, this is kind of just for fun. This is not necessarily building the Stephen Strange character with Benedict Cumberbatch. It is just the next iteration in Marvel, and we're doing some pretty cool things. I mean, it's pretty wacky and silly and comic book and sci-fi, and some elements are cool, but in general, yeah. And the Marvels has some elements, I guess, to that, in terms of like crazy ideas and still keeping with those same themes and building, because this is, at the end of the day, the multiverse saga. So it's not going anywhere. It's going to be an emphasis in Deadpool 3, but the execution has to be better.
Right. Yeah, there's something to the way they did it in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, where it was all played as such a goof. It was all played for laughs. And, you did the thing where you brought in all these alternate version, Professor X and all these other characters, and you killed them off. And it was a joke. And, it was a fun Sam Raimi sequence. The problem was to then try and take that and keep treating it seriously after that movie. Like, if that movie had been the last we see of a multiverse in the Marvel movies, I think it would have been fine because they would have done it in Spider-Man, then they did in Doctor Strange as a joke, and then that's it. I think the problem has been you're supposed to treat Kang seriously, and there being 50 Kangs. Meanwhile, we've already seen it be treated as such a joke in Doctor Strange. So obviously that's in the weeds, but I do think that audiences have kind of picked up on it. Would be as if you did a parody of Thanos in Infinity War and then tried to have him as the main villain in Endgame. You know, you've already sort of killed the gimmick 3 movies ago.
Yeah, it's tough with Quantumania. I don't really know what they're getting at. Like, everyone in the Marvel space kind of jokes how Loki does a much better job of making Kang an intimidating villain, even though he was more prevalent and actually there in Quantumania. So it's weird. They're really all over the place and building this thing out. And I don't know if they're gonna ultimately zag away from Kang entirely.
Right, right. It you know, getting back to this movie, getting back to the Marvels this opening weekend, I mean, the projections are so low. The projections are in Flash territory. You know, could this open in the 50s, 50 million? You know, Flash opened at 55, Black Adam opened what, I think 65 or 66. So it's in that range, in low DC range. Did Shazam get into the 40s? Shazam 2? Feel like
No.
that opened in the 30s. So I mean, the Marvels should open above that. Obviously, Blue Beetle was like 20, but the Marvels
Yeah.
is somehow in that range, in that lower DC tier range. Um, you know, they're obviously spending a lot on last minute marketing to try and avoid that. Um, it's, you know, to me, the thing that could maybe save this opening weekend to some degree last minute is just is there something to people just want a big movie to go to? You know, we've had the Taylor Swift movie and we've had Five Nights at Freddy's, but those were kind of surprises. Those were in some ways outliers, you know, a concert film and this sort of day and date horror video game adaptation. I mean, is there maybe some degree, Clayton, to where audiences are just going to turn up on Thursday night and Friday night and say, you know what? That's a big movie I've seen a lot of ads for. And God damn it, I haven't had a big movie in a while.
You know, I always say, you know, we don't, as in us, but
Uh
the
huh.
general public, and I think a lot of the bloggers out there underestimate the amount of kids that just want to get away from their parents,
Yes.
and the amount of parents and guardians that want their kids the fuck out of the house.
Yep.
So, yes, of course, if there is a big movie coming out, maybe some of those millennial parents will be like, "Hey, I saw there's another Marvel movie coming out. That's exciting. You want to go?" And they're like,
Right.
"Not really." "Well, you're gonna go.
Right.
Here's money for tickets, and here's some money for Pepsi and whatever. And,
Right.
you know, don't waste it on fentanyl or whatever."
Right.
So I do think that there is an element of that. But we know one of the driving forces of young people is to be cool and to be
Mm,
part of a happening. And Five Nights at Freddy's was a happening, and the Marvels ain't a happening. I
yeah.
mean, I feel like there's a level of if you go see this movie and you're excited about it and you're a youngster, you could get bullied for that because these commercials, you know, listen, and I never was a Marvel fan, but there is something a little bit, you watch these trailers, there's something extremely stale about a lot of this.
Hmm.
And I do think it's old news, and kids don't like old news unless it's very, very old news that they're discovering themselves. Right?
Mhm.
And so I do think, yes, is there going to be an element of I just need something to do and a way to get away from my parents? Yes. But there's this doesn't seem to be anything drawing people to this movie at the moment. I mean, the way it's tracking, I mean, we're hearing the possibility of this being a Morbius level opening. I
Jesus.
mean, in the high 30s. If this movie opens under 55.4 million, it will be the lowest opener of any Marvel movie ever. MCU movie, at least.
Yeah.
Right, right.
Under The Incredible Hulk in 2008. So that's
Wow.
55.4.
Yeah.
I mean, we're looking at Box Office Pro, and they're saying 42.
I do
Jeez.
not
So-
buy that number, by the way.
That feels
That's a
feels
crazy number to me.
But
yeah.
here's the thing.
That would
If this
stun
movie
me.
this
Yeah.
movie will probably open under Eternals.
Oh, definitely, because the Turtles did open
Yeah.
to like
71.
70. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah, I agree.
yeah.
So it'll open under. Well, let's talk about it. Does it open under the first Thor from 2011, which opened to 65? And we can also say Captain America: The First Avenger because that opened to 65 as well.
Yeah,
Does it do less than that?
I believe so, but slightly. It'll be right
Okay.
there.
So it'll be over Ant-Man, which opened in 2015 at 57.2. You think that that's going to be it's going to open higher than 57?
Yes. And I
Okay.
mean, that's a tight range. So yeah, like I have it like right in between there, essentially.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now,
I mean,
but-
the disaster line for this is anything under 50. I think
Oh my
If-
God. Yeah.
if we're looking at $49 million, and I think that is why I think at this point Disney is spending money that they know they're not going to recoup because it's just the optics of Monday morning. You know, you've got the Direct podcast, you've got Cinema Spending, you've got Scott Mendelson, Jeff Bach, you've got the BO Boys talking about a Marvel's movie that opened at $49 million. That is their biggest fear. That is why that trailer with Iron Man and Black Widow and Thor that dropped yesterday, not because they think they could make a profit based on that trailer. They are just trying to keep the BO Boys and all of the big name box office pundits from having to talk about a $49 million opening on Monday morning. I think it's all about just like keeping the headlines at bay that Marvel is, because if the Marvels opens at under 50, those are your headlines on Monday, that this whole genre is in a free fall. And obviously, the Disney studio does not want that to be the headline on Monday because they've got other Marvel movies in the can, and they need Marvel to be something that they crank out 3 of them a year for the next 20 years.
But Pat, all the news has been how low this is tracking. That is the news on this movie.
It is.
There's not that people are not talking about
low.
but low is in the 60s, right? Low is in the 60s for Marvel. I think the buzz is that this is going to go even lower. And I think there's a level of, oh, wow, I'm not going to go see this movie because it's already a bomb. I think there is that level of wanting to stay away from a stinker. We've seen it. We've seen enough of that in the BO that once something gets called out as a stinker, and 59% on Rotten Tomatoes is a stinker, okay? It's a stinker. People are going to stay away. So I think the idea that this is going to go lower than the tracking is making people stay home.
I think let me just throw one other thing. There's an element, I think you mentioned, like the younger kids getting thrown to the wolves in the movie theaters. I think there's an element too where so much is online and on TikTok. I mean, the full post-credit scene has already leaked on TikTok and online. So I mean, I don't know his name. I don't need to call him out, but there is someone on TikTok, big followership. And people follow him typically for comments on comic movies or just movies in general. And I think he saw the movie, or maybe he didn't. And all he did was just opened the video by basically spoiling the post-credit scene. And then at the end saying like, okay, you don't have to see it now.
Wow.
I think there's an element to that where speaking of like the world building and story building, it's like, don't worry about sitting through the hour and a half of the movie. Here's what they did to maybe get us excited for a later project. And that is going to hurt the box office, plain and simple. Like when people know when spoilers are running amok, especially with younger kids, lower attention spans. I mean, that's perfect for them. 30 seconds, boom, I know what I need to know. Move on. I'll be there for Avengers one day. I'll be there for Spider-Man for one day. Deadpool 3 is going to go crazy.
Oh,
but
yeah.
there's
Yeah.
also an element of who's in the movie, who are the stars in the film. Like we saw as a Barbie and Oppenheimer, massive casts, and it
Right.
became this whole sensation, and that was cool to go do. That was cool to go see. There's an uptrend in Hunger Games, surprisingly enough.
Yes. Yes. Which is
That's
exciting. I'm very happy to hear that movie, because listen, we all thought there was a good chance that movie would be a low rent disaster.
It
It's
looked like
basically
it was shot
Lion.
in a warehouse.
yep.
Yeah, that was part of the take on it, and then maybe Lionsgate was just rushing it out just to not lose rights to the IP. But the word on that has been getting better, and listen, I do think people are starved for a blockbuster. Because again, Taylor Swift is a concert film, made a lot of money, but it doesn't really scratch the itch of a real
Oh.
theatrical movie. And Five Nights at Freddy's, uh, happy that was a giant hit. It's the video game generation, but I think for a lot of people that still didn't scratch the itch of being a great big blockbuster movie, even though it made a lot of money. So the Marvels had a chance to fill that. It's obviously doesn't seem like that's going to be. So it could be the new Hunger Games movie could come along in a week and really just fill that role of people need a big blockbuster movie to go see. So that'll be
That
interesting
that's
if
absolutely my
that's the
call,
case.
and we'll get to it when we get to the preview
Yep.
for that. But that is my call, is that people are waiting for that. That is what people are waiting for. You mentioning, David, that the fact that a movie can be spoiled by just a stinger, right? So
Right.
when Expendables 3 bombed, Stallone, he said it's because it got leaked and people could watch the whole movie. Wolverine Origins famously got leaked. That guy's in the clink probably still for
Yep.
doing that. That was
Is this TikToker going to be thrown in the clink for just saying the spoiler? And he didn't leak the whole movie like the guy who leaked the Wolverine movie, but is there any legal charges that this TikToker could face for talking about the spoiler of the movie?
I'm surprised he did that because
Wow.
I would think that there'd be, I mean, at least the posts get taken down. Like, why are you? I mean, this is days ahead of the
Yep.
opening, and he's just blatantly saying a giant spoiler at the end. So it was surprising to me, but it's scary enough. It's the world we live in right now, and
Yep.
I mean, I
but
don't think
but there's nothing you could say about Five Nights at Freddy's that would have kept people away. Right?
Right.
There's nothing
Good
you
point.
could have said about Barbie. You could have spoiled the last line in Barbie, and it wouldn't have lost a single penny of business.
Right.
Now
Right.
this
Would have
movie is going
helped.
to lose business because
Yep.
Marvel fucked up, and they started making, that used to be the parsley on the steak, is these things, the stingers and the little Easter eggs. And now
Yep.
it's the whole steak. And
Mm.
people can't make a meal out of parsley, and that is the problem. And so
Right.
that is why. I mean, we got to. Do we want to talk? Okay, let's
Well,
not say numbers yet, because
let's not say
there is
numbers
another
yet.
movie opening.
Yes, we'll get to that. I mean, I think a big difference between the Marvels and their stingers and the reasons that people went to Five Nights at Freddy's. We talked about it with Five Nights at Freddy's. There were all these Easter eggs. There were these cameos. People went crazy when the YouTuber Matt Pat came on screen in Five Nights at Freddy's. But that's not the type of thing that just by spoiling it ahead of time would have kept the audience from going. The difference is they wanted to be in that theater together to cheer when Matt Pat made his cameo in Five Nights at Freddy's. And I don't think there's anything right now in the MCU where young people are excited to go and cheer because this is going to happen. Because spoilers should only help in honesty, because if there's a thing that people want to be in the theater for together, they'll go. And I think the problem isn't the spoilers, it's the problem that the spoilers don't really mean anything to people. The knowing of it maybe is interesting, but unlike Five Nights at Freddy's, right now the Marvel fans aren't saying I want to be there together to see that. They're
Well, I
happy
think,
to just see it on their phone and move on.
yeah, the
Whereas
problem
like
is
the Matt Pat
knowing.
spoiler wasn't going to be something people would just see on their phone and move on.
The problem is knowing is enough.
Yes.
seeing doesn't matter. And
Yes.
that's not how movies work.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, do we want to move on to? Well, I do want to throw something else out there before we move on to the other movie. Because we're talking about these video game movies, and huge news dropped this week, and I know you're itching to talk about this, David.
Yeah.
Legend of Zelda is going to be a big budget theatrical movie through Sony, co-produced by Nintendo. So the same way they did with the Super Mario Brothers and Universal, Nintendo's going to have a big hand in producing this movie. And, obviously there's tons of big video game IP that's been created in the last 10, 20 years that I'm not privy to. I didn't see Five Nights at Freddy's coming, but Legend of Zelda is to my generation, Gen Xers,
Millennials.
and then to the generation since then, because this game has stuck around and kept, like Mario, there's always new sequels year after year. This feels
Yeah.
like about as big of a video game adaptation as you could get. It's in there with Sonic, Super Mario Brothers, that
Oh, yeah.
level. So, David, could you talk about just how earth-shattering this news is that Legend of Zelda is going to be a big screen movie?
Well, I have a few notes that stood out to me. One, it's live action. It's with Sony, but it's in a similar, like you mentioned, it's a similar collaboration like Nintendo had with Illumination and Universal, which I think is
Yep.
really cool. I like the idea that maybe Universal had a pitch and they didn't like it so much, and they went to
Yes.
Avi Arad over at Sony, and he's like, "Hey, I'm all for it. I love the idea of live action. Maybe Universal wanted to stick the whole animated Illumination,
Yep.
G-rated, super kid friendly. I mean,
Yep.
I love the Mario movie because I'm a giant Mario fan, but the plot is paper thin. It's a kid's
Right.
movie, but it made me feel like a kid.
Right.
Zelda is going to be a whole different level. So they have Wes Ball, I believe his name is, the director of the upcoming Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes film, directing this one. And
Okay.
that gets me excited because if you look at that first trailer for the new Apes film, it looks stunning. And that's going to be a big part of creating a Zelda movie. It needs to look really good. I mean, ideally, it needs to look great. CGI can't be shitty, and there's going to be plenty of CGI in it. The cast is going to be huge.
Yes.
Everyone immediately is like, please not Tom Holland. Please not Tom Holland.
So is that actually people are saying not Tom Holland? Interesting, because I would think that he's such a natural fit. Sony did Uncharted and whatever you think of that movie, that was a very big hit. So, but okay, you're saying that the video game fans are worried if they cast Tom Holland as
I
Link.
mean, but I think that, Pat, when you think about that, that's sort of like, what if, Tom Holland should be Spider-Man and Captain America, and he should be the Flash. Like, you have to have different actors playing these iconic video game characters.
Well, it's like the Chris Pratt thing. Chris Pratt is suddenly everything. So no, I don't think people want Tom Holland. Honestly, it wouldn't stun me if they ask. 'Cause I do think, based on Nintendo with Mario, I know it's voice acting. They went for stars. They went for star power.
Yep.
They're going to do the same thing because they want to ensure a hit. And Nintendo is notoriously patient, take their time, do things the right way, focus on quality, not quantity. And that's always been a massive success for them throughout their entire time in the video game industry. Zelda, I think, will not reach the heights of, say, a Mario Bros. In the international box office and just, those crazy global numbers, but it could be a massive success. I mean, if we're just looking at video game adaptations, my expectation is that it will be the second highest grossing video game movie of all time.
I think so.
Confidently. Because Zelda, while it's not on the same level as Mario, and it's actually hitting, I would say, a slightly different demographic, there is still the exact same thing as Mario. If it is a quality film that looks awesome, it's generations, right? These games have been passed on from generations and generations. It's cool with the Five Nights at Freddy's thing, where these are all very recent fans, in the last 10 years, and they're all just super passionate and wanted to go have fun in the theater. But something like a Zelda, I mean, that's so many. I mean, sons and fathers and daughters and mothers, all these, like, it's going to be one of those events. I imagine it'll be PG-13. And if it look, I mean, that first trailer could just go crazy. Like the
Yes.
Yeah.
people that are, it is Zelda, especially, the more recent games, they are somewhat cinematic. They're
Mhm.
lovely. They look beautiful. And there is so much story to tell there. It's cool to think about what Nintendo's doing because they have the IP to keep this going for a long time if they want to.
Yeah.
I think they will continue to make Illumination Mario movies and spin-offs, and those will all be big hits. And they could do the same thing with Sony and Zelda and whatever else they want to do because they own so much. But I'm glad they're taking their time, and I'm glad they are going with a different studio because that shows me they're putting real thought into this.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I think live action is a good choice for this
Yep.
because of what it could be, a more, like you said, PG-13 sort of take on a character than Mario, which is gonna be for the kids, but also for fans of all ages. I mean, the thing with Zelda, and we were talking by the cooler earlier, I agree with you, David, not gonna be as big as Mario just because Mario is like everybody knows Mario. But I remember as a little kid going over to my friend Jimmy Stevenson's house and playing
Name drop.
Zelda on just old school Nintendo and that iconic music and just hanging out, getting fed cookies by his mom. She made the best cookies. We would sit there and we would milking cookies. What's more American?
Right. Right.
And what I'll tell you is that that was the 80s. Now, fast forward 2023, this year, I'm at my other job, okay? Because listen, I'm in the mines, I'm down there getting covered in soot.
Mm-hmm.
And what are the young people talking about? Just this year, a new Zelda video game came out, and they were staying up late
Wow.
to download it and play it. They were coordinating their days off to play a Zelda game.
Wow.
And that is the generational span. And then
Yeah.
there's
Yep.
people older than me
Older.
that
There
are
are
gonna be
people older than
excited.
you.
Yes,
Yeah.
about Zelda. So, yes, this is gonna be a huge smash if it's done well, and Sony knows how to keep things under budget, and Nintendo knows its audience.
Yep. And I do think, I mean, I think we all agree that our gun to our head, this isn't going to be bigger than Mario. But I do see a scenario where this is, and call me crazy, this Legend of Zelda IP, if done right, the ceiling is Lord of the Rings. That is what this IP is for several generations now. This is big fantasy IP. And if they nail this correctly, this could be that level of movie. A movie that gets shockingly high critical reviews and does $1 billion. Maybe not with the most kid level audience, but could be that type of just giant, put it out in December and it is like the biggest movie of the year. I think that is the ceiling on this movie. And it goes to show, back to the superhero thing, the next 10 years of films, the big IP is video games more so than it is comic books. Batman's
Mhm.
always going to be giant. Spider-Man is going to be giant. We'll see what happens with X-Men and those movies, but I think Mario, Legend of Zelda, Sonic, Metroid, whatever these movies, the games that I don't know about from the last 10, 20 years, those feel like bigger IP than the Fantastic Four and whatever Marvel's going to, wheel out the next 5, 10 years.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. It'll be a competition, I think, and it'll depend, like you were mentioning, like the bigger names. And I think Marvel's going to rein it in, and they're going to focus more on those big names, and that's going to
Yep.
be important, really, because I think over the last 3 years, it's been shown that you go more down that list of names and characters, and it's not always the Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yep.
You don't always have James Gunn creating an iconic team and casting a perfect set of characters. Guardians of the Galaxy, I think in a way screwed Marvel in this decade because they thought, you know what? We did it with Guardians. They were a group of, characters no one had ever heard about. So here come the Eternals. Here comes Shang-Chi. And Shang-Chi was good and people like Shang-Chi. Here comes the Marvels. Here comes whatever the hell else. Here, Thunderbolts next year. We'll see.
Is that
right?
movie filmed or not?
No.
Okay.
No, that movie has not begun production yet.
Okay. What is your gut feeling today? Is Thunderbolts ever actually going to come out in theaters, or do they shit can it? Because I thought it was in production. Then when I heard rumors that they may just can the whole thing. What do you think?
It's crazy because if you asked me literally maybe a month or two ago, I'd be like, oh, they're definitely going to make it. It's got a big cast. It should be a pretty cool story within the MCU. I don't know. I think it's up in the air because I think they're currently Iger, Feige, they are rethinking the future and they are rethinking all of these plans they had because they need to be smarter with their money. They can't just throw $500 million to fix it in post on every damn project they do.
Right.
So, especially when you're pumping out all these Disney Plus series that don't make you any immediate money back, and you're just trying to generate viewership and gain subscribers and all of this. So, and those are typically even more obscure because it's on television. So right now I could see where it gets canned. I think they will make it because there is a set script, there are set filming plans. They would have already been filming by now if it weren't for the strike. But they could audible. I do think, honestly, I think Florence Pugh is the main reason that movie gets made because they know they have her under contract for that one.
Right. And with her, there is probably a limit of, listen, if you don't make it by this date, I've got 10 other movies that I have to do. So, I'm sure the contract is pretty rough, but you got to eventually make the movie or you lose her.
Yeah.
It's interesting. One thing going back to the video games and you talking about how this Legend of Zelda movie is going to Sony and of course Super Mario Brothers with Universal. I mean, it is with Nintendo and all of this video game IP, Disney hasn't gotten a taste of that yet, and Warner Brothers, which owns DC, they haven't gotten a taste of that yet. So this could be the other studio's chance to maybe not level the playing field with Disney, but to at least, Disney's with Marvel has been dominant the last 10 years. This could be Universal and Sony's chance to make a bunch of movies in partnership with Nintendo.
Yeah.
And beat Disney, in the year-end box office because of that.
And what's crazy about Sony, I think they're in a great spot. They don't have, which is crazy. It's honestly kind of crazy to say because Sony has been a tortured studio for the last 15 years. In terms of like them, I would say not investing in the right places, focusing too much on stars and, all these things, but they've learned from that. And now they're looking at a place from IP and licensing that's really good. So they still have Spider-Man, all these, Venom and Craven and all these terrible movies. Like they make money and they, as we mentioned earlier, don't necessarily go over budget like all these Disney, Disney and Marvel things do. It's Sony. They have PlayStation. That is really crazy of how they're working with. I know it's Sony Pictures. It's different. It is kind of crazy that Sony is making a Nintendo movie. Like that's kind of a wacky thing, but it's the world we live in. And obviously it's different, studios and parts of the company, but Sony Pictures as well made Uncharted. Will probably do a sequel. They probably want to do a sequel. That was a successful film and have a bunch of other interesting PlayStation exclusive, Sony exclusive IP they could also dive into. So Sony's, and I like how they don't have a streaming service really.
Yeah,
right? They just have deals. They're just making deals and they're making cash, they're making money on these things like that. That pay one deal they have right now of Netflix is awesome. No hard feelings is killing it on Netflix. And it did fine, in theaters. It did okay. I liked the movie. I thought it was pretty funny. But now that is like a perfect Netflix movie. And there's been rinse, repeat. The new Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse now on Netflix, and that's only bringing them more attention because Netflix at the end of the day is still rising to the top of all the streaming services in terms of popularity and what people actually go on. So I like the position Sony is in. If they continue to churn out these Spider-Man films, that these different licensing deals, and now new partnerships with Nintendo, and then can make their own Uncharted sequels and other video game films.
Yeah.
I love that, Dave. I totally agree, and I was just gonna call that out, is that they have the benefit of having weathered the whole streamo war. They weren't focused on streaming. They were focused on theatrical because they don't have a streamer. Crackle is now owned by Chicken Soup for the Soul, so they don't have a streamer anymore. And the licensing deals are making them cash without them having to do a goddamn thing. It's
They're
brilliant.
good deals. Yeah.
Yeah. It's brilliant, and the product is getting even more exciting. And I mean, imagine, the deal they make for the Zelda movie down the road to go on Netflix.
Yep.
I mean, they're just going to be making money hand over fist.
Because
so, Sony is in a great spot.
I agree. And I think it's crazy how Universal, I have no idea the behind the scenes. If I'm Universal, I am fighting for that film because that's a big Peacock streamer. Like they got Mario on Peacock. That's a big deal. Mario movie on Peacock streaming, no added fee. That's a great thing. And now you lose that with Zelda. Obviously, Universal is going to be busy. They do have, it's like in a similar vein. They have the live action How to Train Your Dragon movie coming up. And maybe that was part of the confliction. I don't know the timetable on the Zelda movie, but my guess is, look, it was announced. They have a director in place. We could get this by 2026, 2027, possibly.
Yeah, and I think Nintendo's doing the right thing in that they are. Listen, Nintendo's in a different position than Marvel because Marvel years ago was at a size where eventually they were going to choose somebody. They sold to Disney. That's ever happening with Nintendo. Nintendo's not being bought by a studio. Nintendo is bigger than a movie studio. If anything, they buy Warner Brothers Discovery someday if they feel like it. So Nintendo is in a position where they could go make movies at different studios based on what they think that property needs. So unlike Marvel, which every movie starts to have the same feel because they all have to, in the end, be a Disney movie, and we'll see what happens with Deadpool 3, Nintendo was able to make a cartoon Mario Brothers with Illumination. They're able to make what will probably be more of a adult-oriented fantasy film with Legend of Zelda, and maybe they'll make a like balls to the wall, like gnarly action movie with Metroid someday. With who knows. So it's very interesting to see how the video game genre is going to be the genre of choice over these next 5 years or so.
Yeah, and I mean, on streaming, Last of Us, that I think that changed the game for many people in terms of the outlook of these things. The Last of Us is such an incredible series. They're great games, and I think that made studio heads take these things seriously and realize, wait, there's great stories on here, and there's huge fan bases built. They've built-in fan bases, and there is a level of, if you honor the original IP, the original story, they're all gonna sing its praises, and you can just hire a great cast and run with it. I think it's a winning formula.
So
it's so funny you say that, because one of the young men I was talking to about video game IPs being the new go-to said the same exact thing you said. The Last of Us was the turning point. It showed what video games were doing cinematically, storytelling wise, that could be easily adapted. Now, you're going to see a lot of the TV shows, but you can also do the movies as well.
So another big piece of video game news that I'm seeing everywhere is Grand Theft Auto. They're going to be having a trailer for Grand Theft Auto 6, new game coming out. The trailer is dropping in December. People are excited about the trailer. I mean, to me, someday that is another giant movie just waiting to happen. And, we've talked about them a lot since Killers of the Flower Moon. We talk a lot of Scorsese on this show, and every movie of his could be his last. God forbid. We hope he does 30 more years worth of movies, but you never know. That's the type of movie that these video games could go in a lot of different directions. You get Martin Scorsese directing a Grand Theft Auto movie adaptation. His final film grosses $1 billion. He's able to give the middle finger to superheroes because he's on the side of video games. I mean, that is a box office theatrical story that I think would be just fantastic. Scorsese someday directing a Grand Theft Auto video game adaptation as his final film, grossing $1 billion.
Yeah. I mean, hell, give him Fortnite one day. That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
That's the big one. Fortnite.
That's a big one. So, I mean, he's always looking to how to stick it to Marvel. So I think there's no bigger way than directing a Fortnite movie, directing a Grand Theft Auto movie, and saying, I love video games. Video games are the future of cinema.
I would love Scorsese to be directing Fortnite dances on set. Just having to direct that choreography would tickle me.
Yeah. Yeah. So another genre of movie that is tried and true is, of course, church bus movies, religious movies. So we've got Journey to Bethlehem opening this weekend. So I throw it out. Obviously, David, you are our comic book correspondent. Do you know anything about this Journey to Bethlehem movie? I see Antonio Banderas is in this film. So he plays Herod. He plays
English
King Herod.
Speaking. I think it might be in Spanish. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I thought I saw that though. I'm not sure if it was like.
Let's see. I'm seeing.
It is a musical. It's a biblical musical, faith-based biblical musical.
I thought it was an international film. I could be crazy.
I think it's in English. I think it's in English. It's directed by a Glee director, so that feels English to me. Though of course I'm sure there were Glee adaptations all over the world, but I think he's a director of the Fox version of Glee.
I think you're thinking of the movie that Eugenio Derbez was in. I think that's what you're thinking of, David. Is the one that came out last weekend.
Okay.
That was foreign language.
Okay. So this is a
Radical. Radical was, I think, the movie you might be thinking of.
Oh, yeah. Right on.
No. Okay. This is a new film coming out this weekend. Religious musical, Journey to Bethlehem. So Clayton, you're our chief church bus correspondent on the show, and a co-host, but you're also a correspondent. What is are you hearing anything from your coworkers in the soot mines, or are youngsters excited about Journey to Bethlehem? I'm not feeling that this one is going to be a Sound of Freedom type situation.
No. I mean, speaking of, this is Sony Affirm Films, which is, Sony is putting this out with Affirm Films. It is opening only semi-wide, so it's not going to be a huge opening. Looks like around 2,000 theaters. This is not going. This is trailing After Death and His Only Son. So After Death made $5 million in its first weekend. So this thing's looking like it's going to do somewhere between 3 to 5, anywhere in between that. I don't think this is really going to be a huge movie. So I don't think we're going to have to worry about this probably it'll make top 5, but I don't think it's going to be a barn burner. It's not going to be the next, Sound of Freedom in any way. Or The Chosen. It's not going to be The Chosen season 3 or anything like that.
Yeah, I haven't heard much about this, but it just seems, in some ways, for a religious film, it seems a little cheesier compared to something like The Chosen, which feels just so much more current, or at least feels like so much more dialed in as an IP to the church bus audience. Like this feels like a cash grab.
Yeah, this feels like the sort of religious films that they were doing 10 to 15 years ago that
Yes.
didn't really cross over to mainstream the
Yes.
way something like The Chosen has. I mean, this feels old to me. So I don't see this getting, I mean, there will be church buses, of course. There always will be, but I don't think it's going to be en masse.
Mhm. Um, I'm going to throw out one before we get to our predictions, one more possible factor this weekend. Do you think that this weekend there's a David Fincher film released on Netflix? It's been in theaters to a very small degree for a week, The Killer.
Yep.
So that is a David Fincher film about a serial killer. It's going to be on Netflix this Friday. Any effect on the box office there? Do we think that, that's a movie that David Fincher has made big box office hits? Gone Girl, Social Network, Seven, these are giant hits. Fight Club was a hit. Benjamin Button was a hit. So he is a big name director. Will people stay at home to watch this movie this weekend? And if so, does that take away audience from the Marvels or anything else coming out this weekend? Or do you think it's a non-factor and it's Netflix slop, and even if it's good, people will watch it when they get to it?
Yeah, I saw it last week in theaters. I loved it.
Wow.
But that was me going on my way to see it in a theater and finding a
Mhm.
theater near me. And it was great in theaters. And it's so frustrating that it's only coming, or, that it's mainly coming to Netflix. But no, to answer your question, I don't think so. When something's streaming on Netflix, like you just said, you watch it on your own time. There's no real pressing, effect to watch The Killer, I would say. If you were uber excited about it, like I was, you find a theater to go check it out in, and you watch in a theater like it's meant to be watched, in my opinion.
Mhm.
So, and it was great. That was what's so upsetting. It's like it was great in a theater. There was cool sound editing and like the shooting and stuff. I'm like, wow, this is a Netflix movie. Like, what the hell's going on here? But no, I don't think it's gonna have an effect.
The people who, like you said, wanted to see the movie, saw it in the theater. Everybody else is going to download it on their phone. And hell, if the Marvels gets boring, they'll watch it on their phone during the Marvels.
Yeah,
Wow.
Or they'll go to the shitter and they'll
Yeah.
watch it on the shitter, because that's what you can do with a Netflix movie. And you could also watch an episode of, whatever else. What's
The
a
Ranch.
show that's on Netflix?
Selling
The
Sunset.
Ranch. Selling some whatever's on Netflix. You could also watch that. It's all slop. I'm sure it looks great. I'm very excited about it. But I just think it's not going to take a dollar from the box office this weekend. Not a dollar.
Yeah, and listen, for whatever people say about Killers of the Flower Moon underperforming, this or that, you look at something like The Killer, and if Netflix put it out in 3,000 theaters and then gave it 2-3 months to run, who knows? That's a movie. Again, Fincher has made hits. It's a movie that could have ended up making its 70, 80, 90 million dollars at the box office before it dropped on Netflix, but they don't do that. So let's get to our top 5 predictions. So, David, as the guest, you get to pick. Would you like to predict first, second, or third?
Oh, I always like to lead off. Here we go.
He's
There
so
we go.
bold. I love that about you, David.
Yeah, I always go first. All right. I will kick off. Number 1 is going to be the Marvels. Woo! I am setting it at $62 million. I think it's going to hit 62. I think the box office pro projection currently or tracking of 42 is crazy to me. Now, maybe they're right and maybe I'm wrong, but I'm in the space. I follow these things, like even just like social media, like fans are excited. And I think the almost like underdog effect of the Marvels is going to help it this weekend. Where now suddenly it's like, oh my gosh, like no one wants to see this. Like I really do want to see it. So the fans will be out and it'll reach at least 62 million to me. Obviously, it could really tank, but here we are. Number 2, man, this is tough for me. I'm going to go Taylor Swift. I like Swift at 2. Five Nights at Freddy's. Everyone saw it by now. It's on Peacock. I don't really think it's going to maintain. I actually saw it. I'm not really a fan of the game, but I saw it and it was pretty funny. I mean, the horror was fine, but I thought it was good. I think the Swifties are still out. She's back on tour this weekend, I think that could maybe be a play where it's like, oh, I'm kind of jealous. Like she's in Argentina playing live. Like I'm gonna go check it out in theaters. I don't know, because people get in. I say girls, people get influenced by
People.
live videos
People.
online. Because every night when she's performing, if you go on Instagram Live or TikTok Live, someone at the concert is always playing, like, recording it live. And I think that could play into people being like, you know what? Shit, I want to go see it in the movie theater. So I have it at number 2. Do we give predictions besides number 1?
You can if you want.
Yeah,
Go
go for it. If you got a number, drop a number on us.
8.5 million. That works.
Mm-hmm.
I think that'll be it's still a pretty significant drop, but then again, it's been out for weeks now and it'll be pretty good.
Yep.
Then we go Five Nights at Freddy's around, I'd say like $7 million. It's still gonna keep that audience there. So that's the top 3. Working on 4 and 5. Quickly, I think the Bethlehem movie is gonna stay out of the top 5.
Mm-hmm.
I just looked that up quickly when we were just talking, and I don't see people going to see that. Maybe the church audience, but I don't know about that one. Killers of the Flower Moon, I think, is going to be at number 4. I could see that, keeping up a little bit, not having a very steep drop. I'll put that at about like 4.5-ish million. And then last, a movie I kind of liked, Priscilla. I'll have rounding out the 5th, but it won't make that much. It'll be around 3.5 million. Let's roll with that. But Priscilla, not exactly the hit that Elvis was, but it's still, a pretty fine movie for its release. So yeah, that's my top 5.
That's a great top 5. I mean, I'll go next here, Clayton. I agree. Obviously, number 1 is going to be the Marvels, and I think it's going to finish a little higher than what the Flash did early this summer. I'm going 56 on the Marvels. I do agree. It's almost got this underdog thing to it, and that whole it's not as bad as we thought type of thing going for it. And I just think people need a big movie to go see, and the awareness of a Marvel movie has a floor at this point of like 50 million. So I'm going to go 56. It gets right over what the Flash did in June. Number 2, that Five Nights at Freddy's, it made 19 million last week. So if it drops another 60-70%, then we're looking at a movie that makes like 8 or 9. And I think number 2 is going to be Taylor Swift. That movie could make another $10 million. And Clayton, we had a big disagreement on the last episode.
Our biggest disagreement.
I would say I disagree that was our biggest disagreement, but it was a big disagreement. You were saying that most of the audience for Taylor Swift is still repeat business. I thought new people were finding it. And I'm going to we got some comments on our YouTube channel. One user said, I completely agree with Clayton. This is repeat viewing. No one cares about concert movies. Taylor Swift fans barely go to the theater. This is their event. They see it, likely seen it in the theater multiple times. And then someone else commented, my wife took my 3 kids on Sunday. It was their second time, except my 13-year-old. It was her third time. So boots on the ground reporting that people are seeing this Taylor Swift movie over and over again. So I think that comes in number 2, makes maybe around 9 or 10 million. Five Nights at Freddy's is going to drop all the way maybe to like 7 or 8. And yeah, I guess I've got the same top 5 because this is the big weekend for Killers of the Flower Moon. It had a good hold last weekend, only dropped 26%. This needs to start having like 15% holds in order for it to really make us think, listen, it's not going to make its $200 million budget back. But I think if this movie somehow holds its way into making 70 or 80 million domestic, that's a success. But I think this weekend is key. It has to hold and only drop like 15%. So I've got that 4. And then I agree, Priscilla 5. Priscilla, these Sofia Coppola movies have had pretty good holds in the past. So I think that it's going to hold pretty well and stay number 5. So Clayton,
Wow.
Let's hear
No
your top
faith.
5.
Neither of you have any faith. And Pat,
Ye
no shout out to the Holdovers, which is going mini wide with 900 theaters. You don't think that's going to pop its way into the top 5?
I mean, 900 is still pretty low theater count. And I've seen that film. I loved it. I think that especially now that the SAG strike is over and you could get Giamatti out there on the chat shows and you could get him eating the wings and he could promote this movie. I do think The Holdovers has a chance to be a big Thanksgiving through Christmas and then award season sleeper success, but I don't think it's necessarily going to do much in 900 theaters this weekend. I think that's still a slower burn.
Yeah, pig virus has to eat the wings.
Yes.
Okay, so the reason I wanted to go last is because I'm going to do it. I mean, do you guys want to get nuts?
Yeah, let's get nuts.
Because
Let's
let's
get
get nuts.
nuts.
Okay. Marvel's, I think Slam Doink number 1. We're all agreeing this. There's no way it doesn't go number 1. But I'm going to do it. I'm going to say this pulls a Morbius $39 million opening.
Whoa.
Wow.
I'm going to do it. Why not?
Why not? Wow.
Oh man. That is the nail in the coffin if that happens.
39. I mean, listen, it happened to Pixar. It happened to Disney Animation. I feel the same thing about this movie. It just does not have anything to attract anyone. So 39, it pulls a Morbius. Number 2, I also say Taylor Swift because again, Swifties, for all the reasons you guys mentioned, it held stronger than we expected. And yeah, there's going to be some envy. People are getting to see this live. I'm going to go back for my 4th time to see it in the theater. Number 3, I agree. Five Nights at Freddy's, even though it's going to have another big drop, there's still going to be youngsters who want to go see this. Here's where I disagree with everybody. I think Journey to Bethlehem, as much as I think this doesn't have any buzz and looks kind of old fashioned, there's the church buses. The church buses are going to pull up to the theater and make this a $5 million film. Under that, Killers of the Flower Moon, and then Priscilla. Priscilla is going to be number 5.
Priscilla number 6 then. Killers
What?
5, Priscilla 6.
Killers.
You're right.
Bethlehem
Killers
4,
5.
yeah.
You're right. I'm sorry. You're right. I'm sorry.
All right. So Clayton, ye of lots of faith, he thinks Journey to Bethlehem. And listen,
my priorities are in the right place.
Yeah, it's certain God. That's what Clayton cares about, and box office. And when they all come
ZELDA.
together, it's a beautiful thing. Very last thing, just quickly back on Marvels. I want to ask you, David, because we got an email from our friend and former and future guest Danny of I Screen, You Scream 4, number 4 movies. That people on his show, people talking to him, have been asking about how Valkyrie, Tessa Thompson, was shown in the trailer and hyped up. Do you think she has any play on the box office? That's what Danny wants to know. Tessa Thompson, does she mean anything for this weekend's box office? Or is that just a desperate attempt that people don't care about?
Probably not. I think that's another example of the whole TikTok spoiler video thing that we discussed earlier, where it's like, oh, she's in it. Okay, moving right along. I don't think that was smart for them to show. Maybe more of a tease like they had done previously, like just showing the Bifrost shooting in, but now knowing that she is in the film. No, I do not think that helps.
Right. She's not at the level of Matt Pat, for example.
No.
Yeah.
I guess not.
It's amazing how the audiences shift and how IP changes within a year, where now Valkyrie is not as big of an IP as Matt Pat.
I know. Now, David, before, because we were talking about Danny and Gran Turismo. I don't know if you listened to our last episode because you're a busy man. So Sony re-released Gran Turismo into theaters, and a lot of it had to do with Danny coming on our show and cutting the shit and saying it was a movie that got screwed by the strike, and it's a great film. So he has the ear of Sony because we know they listen, right? Sony listens, Disney listens, Marvel listens. So just really quick,
Yeah.
would you like to cut the shit on anything about Marvel? You're a huge fan of the MCU, devoted fan. If you could cut the shit on anything, direct line to Disney Marvel, what would you say to them?
If anyone knows me, listens to the direct pod listening right now, it's the fact that they need to rely on Spider-Man even more than they do right now. He is the biggest thing going, and he's my favorite character. But if you look at the animated movies, the new game, which is amazing, the comics are selling well. He is still. You mentioned it earlier, Clayton. Like the is it in or is it out? Spider-Man's still in, and he's more in than ever. They have Miles Morales now. Like, I think soon, and that's what the issue is. The issue is still there with Sony, right? Disney does not own Spider-Man still, but they need to keep investing in these collaborative events, bring in Miles Morales, get Tom Holland back, and do whatever they can because Spider-Man is still hot, is still cool, and is still their best thing, their best character, in my opinion. And they have to keep doubling down on him. And it's kind of maybe boring for some people, but like it is what it is because all these stories on different mediums keep getting released and are all awesome. And he really, in many ways, hasn't been hotter from a quality standpoint on all these different levels.
That is cutting the shit
Awesome.
right there. It is what it is. Spider-Man is still cool. Disney, pony up and get Spider-Man in these MCU movies. That's the one thing that could fix everything for them. Totally great cutting the shit. And you could hear more of David and his big cutting the shit moments of his own on the Direct podcast, on Cinema Spending. So is the new reboot of Cinema Spending, did it already drop right now? Is it out
Yeah.
there?
Yep. The first episode back dropped today. It is focusing on, of course, the Marvels. I gave the same $62 million projection and talking a little bit about Zelda. I had a guest on for that, Klein Felt, who hosts a controller, or it's called Controller Club. It's a video game podcast. I work with him at thedirect.com. And so he's a huge video game guy. So I got him on to talk about the future of video game movies, similar to what we did today.
Amazing. So find more of David's work on the Direct podcast, and on the rebooted Cinema Spending podcast.
Thank you.
Of course, follow us on social media. We're on Twitter X. We're on TikTok at the BO Boys Pod. Wannabe O senior intern Christopher killing it with the vertical clips on those accounts. So follow us at the BO Boys Pod. We're YouTubers, so you can get every episode. You can get clips, full episodes, and of course, web exclusives. After the show, it's the After BO. So me and Clayton will be taping another web exclusive After BO for the YouTube channel. So, of course, if you haven't already, subscribe there. Email us, the BO Boys Podcast at gmail.com. Let us know if you're seeing the Marvels, if you've seen the Marvels. And, of course, let us know if you're someone who's seeing Taylor Swift, the Eras Tour, for the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th time. We want to know. The BO Boys Podcast at gmail.com. Give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. Give David and the Direct Podcast 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. And guys, I think we've done it. I don't think there's anything left to say.
No, I don't think there is anything left to say, except
nothing.
for until next time.
We'll smell you at the box office. Nailed it.
Nailed it.